the intimidation of candidates by holding people who have or are in jail for trumped-up charges, does that have a chilling effect? Or does that have the opposite effect, especially with the world watching and encouraging for candidates to step forward and assume what could be very real risks? With regards to the Euro 2012, as I asked Mr. Kramer earlier, do you think there's any room for soccer teams themselves to boycott, or is it better left to the political side of the equation? And then with regards to religious leaders, it's my understanding that religious leaders from the Catholic, Orthodox, Jewish, Protestant, Muslim, all met with Lukashenko and Yanukovych, and pushed the human rights issue in general. I'm not sure if they brought up the Prime Minister or the other incarcerated leaders. If you have any insights on that, that would be helpful. And then the issue of the United Nations and its engagement from Ban Ki-moon to the United Nations Human Rights Council to any other treaty bodies or any other aspect of it, how engaged are they? We know the EU is engaged, the US is engaged, and finally, should we be doing more, and should the EU be doing more?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All great questions. I'll try to answer them briefly. Let me address your first two questions, if I may. With regard to whether the government is being responsive or at least paying attention to what is being said about the elections and the previously noted selective prosecution of political figures, I would say this, that what certainly has gotten attention is increased discussion about the possibility of sanctions, about the possibility of freezing of assets of selected individuals, of denying visas to selected individuals. That is certainly something that I think has created some awareness on the Ukrainian side. In addition to that, raising questions about Ukraine's role as possible chair of the OSCE, I think has certainly gained the attention of authorities in Kiev. So those are two very central issues, and I think that the government is certainly taking note of those types of issues. With regard to your second question, which was the net effect of the prosecution of political figures, similar to our polling that we've conducted in Ukraine, many of the polls that I've looked at indicate that the incarceration of the opposition has only increased their political ratings. That seems to be the trend in any case. Whether that will continue, we don't know, but that has been the case so far. In turn, the government's rating has decreased since these cases have been brought.
Thank you. I also would like to respond to, I think, the first, second, and maybe fifth of these questions. On whether the Ukrainian government is open to pressure, whether they just are completely tone deaf. I want to note the reaction that NDI got when we had an international assessment mission in these local elections in Abukiv in March. And the authorities were very anxious to give us every accommodation. They wanted us. They were very open to briefing us and making conditions comfortable for us, to listening to us, to asking for our views. Even though we did not issue a formal report because it was not an observation mission, we didn't see the pre-election period. A number of government officials at the Kiev Oblast level, at the Kiev city level, and the Party of Regions were interested informally in asking for our views. So I do think they have a lot invested in getting a clean bill of health from the international community on these elections. And I think they are capable of, for better or for worse, separating that a little bit, would like to separate that from the Tymoshenko issue. On what you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission and the Congress and the U.S. government can do further, I would say two things. One is to amplify the findings of the nonpartisan election monitoring groups, including the Ukrainians themselves. Don't allow them to be painted as being irrelevant or biased or something of that nature. pay attention to what these groups are saying and use the influence that you have to amplify them. The other is sort of a diplomatic function. I would also stress working with the EU to ensure that they don't suffer from what has been called Ukraine fatigue, and that they continue to hold Ukrainians to the standards that should be required for membership in European bodies and for the trade agreement, which is very important to Ukrainians. I want to make one quick point on the candidate intimidation. Steve made a good point about ratings going up, but also we have to remember that there's a lot of candidate and political activist intimidation going on out in the regions where it isn't becoming known and where it's much easier to scare people. And that just, it makes it all the more important that observers are out there reporting on this. And I want to particularly commend Ambassador Teft in the past for the support we've had. And we've been able to bring these cases of specifically observer intimidation to his attention. He's been very helpful.
Did you want to touch on the UN before we go to Mr. White?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to your fourth question.
Sure.
With regard to the meeting with religious leaders. I would only say that our polling clearly shows, we asked respondents to rate institutions in the church in Ukraine, whether that's the Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Patriarch, Moscow Patriarch, or the Uniate faith or Catholic faith. Those combined institutions are always received invariably the highest rating in polling in terms of institutions. So if the administration is going to listen to any particular body in the country, it would likely be the United Churches.
Have they been public enough? You know, after all those years of communism and being voiceless almost, have they learned to get their voice in the public square?
Well, that I think is something that's developing, but it's certainly a fact that the president met with them, I think, is a positive and promising sign.
Mr. Wise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to also address some of the issues that were not picked up on by my colleagues, if I can remember, indeed. First, with regards to the effect of some of the messages and noise that has been coming at the authorities, I will leave the macro level issues out of my response, but look really at regards to the election itself. And here I'd like to point out just on the election law itself, you know, there was an initial draft law put forward by the MOJ, which organizations like IFAS and Venice Commission reviewed. And indeed, there were a number of things that were changed in that legislation that were contained in both of our analyses, which we do believe will make it a much more, I would say have the potential to make it a more free and fair election, and certainly will make the election run more smoothly. So I can give an example of this by releasing the territorial districts to the candidates and the public more than just the very day that the election itself starts. You can imagine trying to run in a race where you actually don't know what your district is, and the election starts on that day when you finally learn what it is. Also, you know, guidance on what we'll do with overseas voters, which was lacking from the law. Also, the removal of some, in the final draft, they removed some precincts which could have been by law opened up in various locations not related to a military or diplomatic post, but merely in a shopping mall or what have you, another location that they sanctioned. A couple of other things like putting free access to government funds for TV airtime and press and media, et cetera, et cetera. I would also say that the CEC, while they did not pick up on all civil society's recommendations to be transparent in how they were drawing boundaries by any means, they did stick to a couple of provisions such as the 12% maximum deviation rule between the sizes of the districts, and also distributed the districts evenly among Ukraine's regions in a relatively straightforward and, let's say, standard manner. As far as the political, as far as the effect of, the persecution of the opposition, I would just agree with my colleagues and say that I think that absolutely has been the cause for a significant increase in the popularity in the polls, and I do not know the extent of some of those former opposition leaders, how popular they were before ratcheting of persecution happened. And with regards to the Euro 2012 boycott, I would agree with my colleague David Kramer to, let's keep it political if we can. I mean, let's also remember that Russia is competing in those games and also has a pretty good team, and I don't know if they would be willing to boycott this event, so it would be hard to do it sort of on a widespread basis. And I would also say that the history of boycotts has been mixed, I think, when we look back at it through history with the 84 Olympics, I think it was. So in that respect, I would say hopefully it will stay political. I mean, hopefully there actually will be some political pressure because, of course, and political boycotts because we're not actually at the point of the games just yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the questions are pretty well covered, but I would like to ask this. Have other countries brought actions or taken action that the United States should emulate?
I think that the United States, through our embassy in Kiev, and has joined with our European friends in making very strong statements in advance of these elections. They're critical importance. Every time we have a national election in Ukraine, we say it is the most critical election ever. And every time we say that, it's true. It's just as true this time. So I think the statements coming out now are timely because the fact that districts have been drawn, the election law has been amended, the official campaign will start. And so I think speaking up now is appropriate. To speak with one voice across the Atlantic is appropriate. I think that's being done. But finally, I think the key is to be persistent in holding officials to account in the hope that these elections can be well administered and meet international standards for fairness and transparency. That's the goal. That's what we hope Ukraine can achieve. We all want Ukraine to achieve this.
Okay, on the election issue, do the other two panelists agree that we're working in concert with their European allies and should do so, and when nobody's taking these steps beyond us? Ms. Fox?
Yes, I agree that it's very important to be working in concert with European allies and to be persistent and to follow up, as Mr. Nix has said. And I also agree with him that we've had a very strong voice in this and are doing what we should be doing. We just need to keep doing it.
Mr. Wiese, you concur?
Yes, I do. I concur, and I also would like to point out that not only, it's not so much maybe that we should be emulating some of our European allies, but maybe they should be emulating us as well. I think that the U.S. has actually done a very good job and should be commended for often leading some of the statements and some of the issues that we have concentrated on over the past several months. And again, we've mentioned Ambassador Taft, and I think he's done an excellent job in Ukraine, and he has really, let's say, pushed, I think, the European allies to sort of all be on the same page, and we certainly thank him very much for that.
And those statements are about the elections, and they also consistent with the treatment of the former Prime Minister and the prison conditions of people being imprisoned for. Same, okay. Let me ask you this, just Mr. Nix, you first. We had hearings yesterday on the Uzbekistan and all the other stands in Central Asia. If you take all the former Soviet republics, where does Ukraine rank as far as democratic principles and actions of the present government? Above who and beneath who?
Well, sure. Comparatively, I'd like to say at the outset that it's not at the same level as it was, say, after the election of 2005. Obviously, there's been regression. Where does it stand now? It was pointed out earlier by Mr. Kramer. It's not Belarus, it's not Russia, but it's certainly not Western Europe. Somewhere in between, and if Ukraine wants to realize its European ambitions, if it truly wants to be part of the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, it has to do better than it's doing now.
And Mr. Kramer, I kind of guess he gives like a report card, and he's got, fair and not so fair and whatever. Are you familiar with this report card?
Yes, I'll refer to it regularly. It's very comprehensive. It's done regularly. It's relied on by the NGO community.
So with Western Europe and Belarus and Russia, they're in the middle, but how are they with all the other Soviet Union, scratch Western Europe?
Well,
in that division, if they're in that division, are they a 1 seed or an 8 seed, or they not make the playoffs?
Well, that's an interesting analogy, but I will say this in terms of Eastern Europe, Ukraine is lagging far behind the Baltic countries and the other countries, Slovakia and Poland. It needs to do better. Hopefully it will. That's what this is all about. I think the strong voices of Congress and supporting Ukraine in its efforts to democratize will have real effect. So they're not where they should be. Hopefully they will get there, and sooner the better.
Are they better than the stands?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, I could say that. I think unequivocally, even in Kyrgyzstan, where we've had something of a democratic breakthrough, at least we have the constitutional makings of a parliamentary republic, a parliamentary system of government, but that's still very fragile. No one knows how that will pan out. So, yes, obviously Ukraine has gained strides. Its location, I think, dictates that it acts so. So, in some, absolutely ahead of the stands.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Cohen. Just final question. Would a congressional or CODEL of this commission be helpful, say, between now and July?
I think I speak for all of us when I say absolutely. Of course, all of our organizations would also be happy to assist with information or other background materials in advance of such a trip.
We will take you up on that. Thank you. We will try to put that together as quickly as possible. And just one on a more humorous note, I'm sure Ambassador Taft showed you his beloved Green Bay Packers helmet. Thank you so much for your insights, your counsel, your tremendous work on behalf of human rights. It is extraordinary, and the people of Ukraine benefit because of you. Thank you so much. Hearing is adjourned.